right? We like for this to be, you know, really educational plus a networking piece of it. And so kind of for this one and most of these, right, usually it's about 45 minutes or so presentation. And then we'll do about 15, 20 minutes Q&A if it makes sense. But really the fun is at the end of it, right? Whenever we do breakouts. And so we'll break everyone out into small groups, right? We try to do kind of 5 to 8 people and maybe do 1 or 2 of those really to give you a chance to meet someone new, learn something new, right? And maybe build a potential partnership, just because multifamily is all about partners. And I stress that to everybody, right? I mean, it's really, you know, and I came from the tech world, used to work at Microsoft, and I wish I was better about relationships, you know, previously, right? It wasn't as applicable, but in multifamily, it's all about who you know, build relationships, get to know people. And that's really why a lot of us are up here right now. And so, you know, with that said, right, you know, we'll go ahead. I'll do the kind of the first half. Kyle will kind of do the end. And then after that, right, we want to open it up to Q&A. So if you have questions, go ahead and put them into the comments as we go through the presentation. And then at the end of it, right, we can kind of open it up and we'll all do Q&A. So with that said, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and then I will kind of give a talk. So let's see. Actually, give me 1 second. Let me share screen.
Do I need to, okay, you got it.
Second, let me swap displays. All right, you guys see the presentation?
Yep, we're good, Feras.
All right, so for those of you that don't know, you're watching a multifamily master's presentation, so hopefully that's obvious, right? But really for my half of the presentation, kind of first thing, I guess, before I kick off, you know, Kyle and I, we're both candid guys, right? Kyle, I think you'd probably say you're fairly candid too. You know, we want to just be candid with you all, talk about things. But please, if you're going to make any important life decisions, definitely talk to a professional. We're not professionals in terms of CPAs and attorneys or any of that stuff. But really, I wanted to talk about, you know, a deal that we did in Atlanta. This deal went full cycle last September, right? And kind of tell you guys a little bit of the story about the end-to-end, right? This is from kind of how we found it, how we bought it, and what happened with it. That's kind of the first deal. And then I'm also going to go through another deal that we're doing right now that we're still, you know, we're not sold, we're nearing the finish line. But again, I think it's a good case study, right? In terms of just learning a lot about what to kind of look for in terms of a deal and kind of how that process works. So this deal used to be called Laurel Mills, right? We called it, we obviously renamed it Woods of Decatur. Why? Decatur is a good part of Atlanta, or at least knowing as a kind of an improving part of Atlanta. We wanted to kind of tap into that name recognition, right? And again, you can see these pictures. The property looks fantastic from these angles, right? Like, you know, these are the best angles the broker could find. You know, there wasn't many pictures inside the thing, and I'll show you guys why, right? You know, this was a deal that essentially I had ran the numbers, and I'm going to be kind of quick, right, in the interest of keeping it time, so definitely feel free to save your questions. But you know, this deal was a deal we found and underwritten. The numbers made sense. The pricing was good. And, you know, we figured, hey, it's worth getting out there, right? It was our first deal in Atlanta. We wanted to get into a deal that we knew we could home run, meaning we just did our part, right? The deal would perform, you know, and that's different than a traditional value add deal where maybe you're hoping for rents to push. This was a deal that needed a lot of work. And we knew that ultimately the buck stopped with us, right? We had to grind it out, work through the rehab and get it done. And so as you guys can see, you know, this was the first on-site. I still remember it because I had just come from Disney like a couple days prior and then, you know, kind of flew out to Atlanta and, you know, rainy day. And you can see this property, I mean, had potholes that literally I could lay inside of and a car could probably drive over me, no questions asked, right? It was really a dilapidated deal. And, you know, but the numbers work, right? And so you kind of get out there like, all right, this deal needs a little bit more work than I thought it did, right? Whenever I first saw it. And again, this is before I had offered on it. But then again, you know, we had modeled it out, right? But once we got on site, we had to kind of revisit what we modeled. And so really, you know, it's about working a budget. And I like to say this business is hard, but it's really ultimately a numbers, systems, and process business, right? And so make sure your pro forma, your budget, your analysis makes sense. So on this deal, I think initially I had modeled $400,000, right? On the initial, very first version of this kind of deal. Well, we ended up really modeling at $900,000. And honestly, in hindsight, this is a deal that we could have probably put $2 million into also. But $900,000 is kind of the number that we had pegged and worked through. We adjusted our purchase price down from $4.2 million to $3.8 million, right? It's a 99-unit property. So for those of you that can do the math, it's about $39,000 a door, which is pretty cheap, right? It's a couple of years ago. And that's what we offered, right? And I guess before I hop over, I'll tell you guys really quickly. So We had offered on the deal, and us and another group we knew were actually kind of the contenders. And ultimately, we got the deal. Why? We were persistent with the broker, right? We came out there, we saw it, and then you build a rapport with the broker. And so I talked to Ben. I'm like, Ben, this deal will work. I promise you. Let's go get it done. And so we get out there, right? We get our offer accepted, and this is the picture at the end of the day. Now, the beginning of the day, Ben's face was a lot more red than it was now, right? He got out there and hadn't, the deal was not what he was expecting, right? I had already seen the deal. He was getting out there. He's like, oh boy, what are we getting ourselves into, right? It was a rough deal. I mean, we knew we had to reposition the deal. We knew we had to kind of do a lot of cleanup, a lot of deferred maintenance, and it had down units. And so for this deal, right, it had 9 down units. It was a situation where the owner should have never owned a multifamily ever, right? They didn't know what they were doing. It was self-managed. It was just a mess, right? Heads in bed situation, a lot of deferred maintenance. Didn't really know what was going on. And we knew that, right? And we did our due diligence, and I'll kind of talk that here in a minute. But, we knew that we would have to go in, clean out the property, and reposition it, right? But I told Ben, don't worry, I promise you this deal will make us money, right? And so by the end of it, once he kind of got over the initial shock, I like to say, right? He's smiling in that picture. And so, we got it done. So with that said, right, what was our business plan, right? Let's kind of go through that. So here's what we did. This is actually what we presented to our investors, right? 10% cash on cash. We expected to double it about 5 years, $900,000 of improvements, right? We knew, and I'll show you here in a second, we knew that this deal was in the path of success, right? As people like to say, we're walking that line, right? Where you kind of have the bad side of the street and the good side of the street. And so we knew things were improving. Our purchase price is really good, and we knew if we can get it done, the deal would work, right? And again, the deal across the street was occupied, had a waiting list, right? So we knew that there's demand in the area. And so you guys take a look. So this is in East Atlanta, right? Decatur is really to the north. We're kind of on the outskirts, right? But if you see, we are, I guess it didn't carry through. We are right there, like where that red hash mark is, right? You can kind of see that red dot. And so right across the street from us, fully occupied, there's a new development that went in after we got under contract. More importantly, though, that property up near the Walmart, right? It was purchased vacant. And what happened is the owner bought it $40,000 a door, which is about the same price as us, but he put another $40,000 a door into it. So his cost basis was $80,000. But, the brokers, we knew were trying to sell that for $110 a door. So we knew that there was opportunity to work there, right? Someone had already proven that's the high-end remodel. We didn't do that, right? And that's actually ultimately whenever we sold it, right? The person that bought it is looking to do that next step, right? But again, we could see that there was opportunity here. And, we're anchored by a mall. This is pre-COVID days. Whenever you want it to probably be near a mall, probably not so much anymore, right? And again, here's the characteristics, right? The other thing I liked about this deal, it's all 2 and 3 bedroom units. I love properties that are 2 and 3s more than I like the properties that are 80% 1 bedroom. And so, the asset was good. The floor plans are good. Had a lot of the things that make an attractive property, right? And so again, that's a little bit about it. And, the interiors are pretty basic. This is probably the nicest interior, right? They had, the wash and dryer hookups, had breezeways that were disgusting that we redid all the flooring, repainted, cleaned them up. 9 units were were offline. And I want to tell a story. So the reason these 9 units were offline, right? This property, one of the buildings was on a hill, and essentially the building, right, the back half of it was lower than the front half. And what happened is that the back half, because it was lower, it had to actually basically had a pump that was pumping sewage into the city sewage. Now these previous owners, they obviously the thing had failed and had backed up into the units, and they ripped it out to the stud and had been offline for who knows how many years. Well, guess what? We get out there. We get someone out there to inspect it. I think we had budgeted $100,000 to redo this whole thing. It ends up being a $30,000 fix to be able to get 9 units online. And, if you really kind of do the math, we made our return back almost immediately. But what's funny is about these owners, right? This is where having a quality owner makes a difference. They had, once we had the professionals out there, right? They got down there. There was only 1 pump down there. There's always supposed to be 2. So if one fails, a siren goes off and the other one is still going, right? So you don't have to worry about the backup, in a failure case. The other situation too is not only was there 1 pump down there, it was a residential grade pump, not a commercial grade pump. For $30,000, we got 2 pumps down there, got all the electrical redone, and got it professionally set up for us. And so again, it was just almost a no-brainer. And you're like, seriously, spend $30,000, get 9 units online. And each of these 9 units are making almost $1,000, right? 3 months, we made all of our money back, and now we're purely in the green. So kind of a no-brainer on that. And then on top of that, we did do a lot of property updates. And so again, this property had a pool. The pool had been offline for many, many years. It did not have a playground. So our plan was get the pool online and, get the playground added in, dog park, right? Again, turn it into a family-friendly place. And so again, this is kind of, you can see our sales comps, right? That's the blue was us, and that property, the red is one that was down the street that got bought vacant, whereas at least we weren't vacant, right? So our sell price was very attractive. And again, rent comps, we knew that we had a runway there, right? I'm not going to dwell too long. This is ultimately what we presented to investors, right? And maybe the money slide is really this one, right? Here's what we were expecting. We told investors no cash flow year one. We expected that. We knew it was a reposition. We knew we were going to have to get occupancy down. And ultimately, I'll tell you guys a little bit of the story here on the next slide, right? But then we knew after that we'd be cash flowing and probably be able to do a good refi. And so that's kind of a little bit of an example of what we thought, right? We thought essentially over the 5 years, investors would get about a little over a double of their money. And so here's kind of the before and after, right? Here, and this is really a classic, and then the after is one of the downloads that we got online. And we started to do this upgrade throughout the property. Now, ultimately, right, with this property, right, here's another one before and after, right? The pool was beautiful. I mean, it actually looked really good. It's right next to the clubhouse. And, kind of continuing on, I guess I'll show you this slide. Same thing. We had these potholes all over the place. I mean, it was disgusting, right? Again, we spent, what did we spend on? I think we spent about $30,000 on parking lot, right? One thing I recommend to everybody, if you're buying a parking lot, seal and stripe it. That's 10 grand of work. It gives it that black coating, right? We also have to do a lot of patchwork, but sealing and striping can really do a big difference to a property, right? Now with this property, right, we knew we were going to have to clean it out. So, we basically went from 78% to 55, but really we got down to 40% net all in, right, at one point. Going to 40% occupancy is scary. You're operating in the red. Now, what made this deal difficult was the fact that our lender was a terrible lender, right? We used the bridge lender. For those who don't know, in multifamily, you have two different types of big lending, right? You have agency debt, which is your Fannie, Freddie, nice long-term debt, and you have bridge debt. Now, agency debt only works for nicer properties that are stabilized, better occupancy, whereas this deal was a complete turnaround. And so it's kind of like your hard money lender. And the problem with bridge debt is the wild, wild west. There's not a lot of regulations, not a lot of rules. We had a bridge lender that was essentially a loan-to-own shop that we found afterwards. They were making it extremely painful to pull out any money because all of our rehab money was sitting with the lender, right? You have to get approval from them. And they said it was one of the best turnarounds they've ever seen, but they also essentially made it impossible to get money out. So that was the real pain point, and that's something we learned. We'll never make that mistake again. But again, you work through this, right? Brought on security to help clean it up. Again, that's what got us down to 40%. We pushed trends, collections. We tripled our collections in 4 months. I mean, that's not a joke. I literally pulled up the T12. In 4 months, we tripled how much money we were collecting. And ultimately, we ended up selling that deal, right? For our investors, and this is net to investors, 18 months, they made about 80% return, right? Very, very strong returns on a deal like this. But, it was a riskier deal, right? And I tell people every deal needs to be risk adjusted. So for a deal we're doing a lot more rehab, a lot more risk, they need to bet on us. Well, they should get rewarded more than a deal that might be stabilized, performing really well, and kind of working out. And so kind of the final number, right? We raised only $1.1 million on this deal, $3.9 million purchase price, sales price of $7 million, profited about $2 million. Now, the deal, we lost all of our hairs on this deal though, right? Like, this deal was really painful. And what's funny is that we had this deal under contract to sell, and the buyer ended up, so that pool that I told you guys about, right? Well, one thing to learn is that even though you get the pool online, you think you did everything right. Well, we couldn't get a pool permit for that pool because essentially they wouldn't grandfather us in on that property because the new regulations required you to have a restroom that's accessible, right? We didn't have the budget to set that up. Now, we told the next buyer that's why we couldn't get it online, and he ended up going to the county to ask them, hey, is this actually, the story? And so that was the mistake because that county, DeKalb County, is extremely notorious for finding people, right? They're really aggressive about trying to essentially, you know, a big money grab, right? They hear of properties for sale and they try to go out there and cash on it. And so he ended up basically, they heard from him because he asked that question. 2 days later, or 3 days later, we had an army of inspectors descend. They gave us 110 violations on a property that we made the rough deal in the area really look good. And so that's kind of how they treated us. And ultimately, we had to settle with the county because they knew we were going to have to settle before we ended up going to closing. And so, you know, that cost us another 50 grand. And what's funny is 3 days later, they came out and gave us the same 110 citations. It was ridiculous. It's, yeah, I mean, that county is just full of it. And so anyways, you have to get an attorney involved. And, you know, there's pain in this business, right? And not everything is easy, but I guess hopefully that gives people a taste of what to look for, right? Especially on your first deal. I highly recommend pick the first deal that you know you can perform on, and don't overextend yourself, right? Don't do a big heavy lift if that's not something you know how to do or comfortable with or know someone that can help with, right? But you really want to reduce, I like to basically say what we do as syndicators or operators, we're looking to constantly reduce risk across the board, right? From the macroeconomics, we liked Atlanta. So I guess the story of us getting to Atlanta, we're in Texas. We were feeling like we're starting to get priced out of Texas. We couldn't find deals at attractive price points. Atlanta was the next city that we knew the market was good, right? Job growth, population growth, and ultimately the price per unit, the pricing for assets relative to the rent was really attractive. So that's why we got into Atlanta, but it was our first deal and we knew we had to perform. And so, you know, I recommend people look for all these things that are constantly reducing risk up until really, okay, the deal across the street is doing exactly what we need to do. We just know our business plan is pretty clear. Go from here to here. We're not having to tread our own path. I don't like to be a trailblazer whenever it comes to, you know, my investors' money, right? I want to figure out the clearest path to kind of perform and do our part. So that's deal number one. And I guess we're going to say something, pal?
Oh, I didn't know. Did you have a deal number two or
I have one more to kind of go through.
Oh, okay.
Similar,
Yeah.
a different kind of play, but also similar in some ways.
Oh, awesome.
So I wanted to kind of help. Just again, we're trying to do different case studies, and that's why I'm blowing through these. And we'll pause at the end and do questions after Kyle does his part as well. So next one, right? This is a deal that we own currently. We're probably going to sell this deal here in the next 2 months, right? And so, but it kind of showcases again another type of deal. And so this was a deal had 30 down units, right? So once we did the 10, we knew we could do more. And you know, this is a combination of fire units, flood units, needed like water drainage issues, things like that. But it was a deal, phenomenal location, really nice upgrades. And the previous owners had upgraded 90% of the water heaters, 90% of the ACs. And all this is stuff we found while we were walking the property and whenever we did due diligence, right? And so again, you can kind of see, these are actual slides, right, that we had put together for the day. 17% is what we expected, right? We're looking about 110% in 6 years, right? But we knew our location was phenomenal. I like to say there's very few Starbucks in all of South Atlanta. This deal is like right across the highway from Starbucks. So it was literally, we knew this area because that was the only Starbucks we'd ever go to. For those who don't know, I'm a big Starbucks guy. You know, and again, it's one of the biggest developments in all of Southwest Atlanta, right? Camp Creek Marketplace. I mean, there's a lot there. Lowe's, Target, BJ's, you name it, it's there. And the previous owners had done, essentially, they buy these properties that are super dilapidated. They do the initial heavy lift, right? And then there's just a lot of meat on the bone. And from their side, I think they had 4 huge projects going on and they were just cash strapped, right? So they needed to make an exit. And so that was ultimately our plan. And then on top of that, right, the real icing on the cake is that it was already approved for the FAA noise reduction program. So for those that don't know, Atlanta has the largest airport in the world, and they already have a grant. This is free money. We're not having to pay it back, where basically the airport, as part of expansion, they were replacing all of the windows, front doors, and sliding glass doors for all properties that got approved. And approval is a process. They make sure that, you know, you're safe and compliant and no leaks and all this other stuff. Yeah, this work, but they're doing this heavy upgrade of the property for free. And it's nice as an owner to show up at a property, see a crew of 20 guys out there working on your property for 8 months, and it doesn't cost me $1, right? Outside of just making improvements that they make me do anyways to the property. And so we knew we had all these things lined up where you got to get the down units online, work to the FAA noise reduction program, push rents, right? And so again, that's what we looked for, right? So this is a bit property, 152 units, right? You can see the upgrades looked really nice. This property is a market leader, top rents in the market, and we're still the top, and we leased up insane. And we're at 98.6% leased today. Right. So again, what I was showing people earlier, I like the slide a lot. Because the question really people ask is, how do you find a good deal, right? And ultimately, again, you're trying to reduce your risk. You're trying to find something that makes sense financially. So on this property, right, the previous owners had put $2.7 million into it. And I literally had this slide on my investor presentation, right? 90% of them were new HVAC, 90% new water heaters, new siding, new rails and balconies, and 50% of the units were upgraded nicely. That's what the previous owner had done. On top of that, right, the airport was going to put $2 million into the property for us, improving all, the windows, the doors, all that. And then we were putting in another $1 million to get those 30 units online. So if you really do the math, right, 2.7 plus 2 plus 1, $6 million improvements on a property that we're buying for 9, right? And so, I mean, phenomenal, right? In terms of that's just all stuff, and then within the past 2-3 years that got done to the property. And again, we're that star on the bottom right. So look at where we are, right? Really, really good area in terms of just a lot going on, a lot of traffic, and they've expanded that road right in front of us as well now. So, it's a deal that did well. And so again, I'm just kind of blowing through this because I just want people to get visibility into kind of some of the things. One thing, if you're not, so in Texas, I'm going to say this to people, this is actually a learning exercise for people. So Texas, it's really popular to do solar screens. It's like the thing, right? What are solar screens? It's the blackout blind screens that you put on your windows. So that way you don't see the stuff behind it, right? Because in an apartment, one of the worst things is you see all the broken blinds and all this other stuff. And so instead, in Texas, really popular to put solar screens, it blacks it out, and it gives the property a uniform look. It's not really a thing in Atlanta. We're the guys that started doing that in Atlanta, and it's slowly starting to pick up, right? And I know Kyle can probably talk about Arizona. Arizona likes their crazy colors and stuff too, right? But some of these trends, you can apply them from one market to the other, and it's helpful. And so this kind of talks about a little bit about what we were doing, right? And 30 down units, right? You got to have good contractors and team. And on this deal, we had another partner who has a construction company, really sharp guy. Oliver helped us tremendously on this deal. It had made it a really, really almost, a walk in the park for some aspects, right? Property had no amenities, and it was lawsuit waiting to happen. They had a rink-eating playground that we ripped out day one. Laundry was a huge mess, right? Roof had caved in. The airport project, staff challenges, right? We had a lot of things going on. And ultimately what's funny is that we ended up, the previous property I showed you guys, we sold that property. That manager we brought onto this, and he's been a rock star at that. Right. And again, you can see this is as of April. So now we're even significantly higher. But if you take a look, right, month over month, we're collecting more and more and more. And I think as of last month, I think we hit $138,000, right? So going from 80 to 138 is a very big difference in collections, right? And so moving forward, right, we're stabilized now. What does stabilized mean, right? Lenders want a property that is stabilized, meaning 90 for 90. For 90 days, it's been 90% or more occupied. And so we're there, and, that's a BOV from a broker if you can't see it, but essentially, they expect it to sell between $90,000 to $98,000 per unit, right? And so I think that's probably, we're still exploring all options, but for a deal that we bought for $59,000 a door, we put about $7,000 into it. So our cost basis is $66,000 per unit. Our exit's probably going to be 90 plus. And so again, that's what you look for, right? How do you as an owner buy a property? You can go in, make upgrades, push the income, and ultimately get yourself in a position to cash flow, refi, do a supplemental, or sell the deal, right? And so that's maybe my 2 deals that I wanted to go through.
Yep.
And
Awesome.
I guess I kind of have this slide for people, but that's me, my email address. Feel free to reach out to me, email me if you have any questions. And Kyle, I'm going to go ahead and do Kyle on there, but Kyle, that's his as well.
Yeah,
and
awesome. No, that was great stuff to go from beginning to end and everything. I think that's
for people. And again, this is recorded, so we'll put this up in the group if you guys have questions. But I was really trying not to pigeonhole on any one thing, but I want people to see the story, because ultimately these properties, you need to figure out what the story is. It needs to be a plan that is feasible, because that's what you need to work towards, and that's what your investors need to see and understand as well.
And I think it's good to hear from like the early ones that you did as well and everything to the later ones that you did just last year. So that's awesome.
They do get easier later on.
Keep typing questions in there. We're going to hold off on the questions in terms of asking Feras any of those questions. We'll get to them at the end, but we're going to go ahead and move to Kyle right now. So Kyle, come on and go ahead and give yourself an introduction as well before you go ahead and talk about your deal. Go for it. Oh, we can't hear you, Kyle. You're on mute.
All right, can you
Well,
hear me
aren't you
now?
a professional
There we go.
podcaster here? Aren't you the
Damn, I
professional?
can't believe I did that, man.
You know, we're the
Kyle did a
rookies.
much better
you're the
job putting an
professional,
about
man.
me slide. I just kind of just stumbled through it.
Who is this Kyle guy you guys have coming on? Okay, well, I'm Kyle Mitchell, and I'm also part of the leadership group here at Multifamily Masters. I remember I was at Powell's second meetup ever, so I wasn't there for the first one, but I was there for the second, and been going to his meetups ever since. But I run the Long Beach chapter out here in Southern California. We also have a chapter in Phoenix that we fly out to and have. We mainly invest in the Arizona market, so we've got property in Phoenix and in Tucson. And much like Feras, we invest in value add Class B and C type assets. So I know we're kind of short on time, so I'm going to breeze through this as much as quickly as possible. But I always like to start with kind of where I came from and my background, just to show people who are out there that have any doubts that it can get done. You know, when I first went to Powell's meetup and they were talking about buying, you know, multi-million-dollar businesses and apartments, I just thought to myself, there's no way this could actually be possible. And I'm here to tell you that it is definitely possible. And I just like to take people through kind of my journey of how I got this first deal that I'm going to talk about. It's a 42 unit in Tucson. It was the first deal that we did, and that was last May. And just for clarification, this is not a full cycle deal. However, it's currently under contract and we're supposed to close in September. So hopefully it does get full cycle, but I'm definitely happy to be able to show everybody, you know, how we got it to that point. So I signed up for a coaching program in December 2017, and I'm not going to read through all of this, but essentially it took us 18 months to do our first deal. So it didn't happen overnight. It was a lot of hard work, but through consistency and sticking to our plan, we were able to get it done. But, you know, essentially we started our investor database in January 2018, and luckily we did not close until May of 2019 because we really would not have been ready to raise $1 million for our first deal if we would have gotten it earlier. 11 months after we started investing in real estate or looking into multifamily, and when I say we, it's my wife and I left to do this full time. I had been looking for a career change, and I immediately fell in love with multifamily. I was a general manager and a regional manager for a golf management company, and everything we do in the property management world for golf courses, you also do for apartments. And so it just spoke to me. I fell in love with it. We're about building systems, operating properties, managing people, driving income, controlling expenses, and that's what you do in multifamily. So I left 11 months later and went full time, and here we are today. So this property that I'm going to talk about here, let me see, is a 42 unit in Tucson, Arizona. And I'm going to walk you through the process of even how we found it. So when we first started looking into multifamily, I definitely knew it was something that I was going to leave my job for. So it's a lot different than other people where they may want this as a side gig or as a, just to build some passive income. I knew 100% this was something I was going to do full time. So my plan was to position myself to leave my job. So I used to call brokers. I have a list of 56 brokers. I actually called them all today. And every other week I would call them just to check in, see how we're doing, and build a relationship with them and see if they had any deals on the market. So
all is well.
We used to drive 7.5 hours, 8 hours on a monthly basis. My wife and I, we'd leave at 2 in the morning, 2:30 in the morning, get home at 12 a.m. the next day. On one of those drives, you can see the little bubbles here. This is exactly how the conversation went with the broker. But we were driving out, and he asked me if I wanted to come see a property that he literally just got the keys to. And from that, we ended up getting this exact property under contract. We were meeting our property management company out there already. So we got to tour this property. And then since we were out there, we also toured comps with our property management company. And here's the property. And when you first look at it, you're like, no way do I want this property. I actually showed my partners it, and they were like, oh man, this is just not. It was kind of like Ferris's story with Ben when he first saw the properties, was not interested in it at all. I had the same reaction, so I understand how Ben was feeling, or Feras maybe. But when you first look at the property, it's not appealing. It's got sliding glass doors. It's an old motel style, but knowing the market has a lot of these right in that area. And the other thing that I absolutely loved, and it's in one of the slides, but when we got here, I called the number on the sign right here and it was disconnected. This property was not being marketed online at all. And so the only possible way to actually rent up a unit here was to call the property management company, ask them if they had any units available. And then that property management company would have had to told them about one of their properties, which is this one, about available units. So it was very difficult to rent up. It was an out-of-state buyer, California buyer. And much like Feras mentioned, this person should not have been buying multifamily. They didn't know what they were doing, very hands-off, and they were just letting the property management company essentially run it to the ground. So as you can see, this has got, well, it's kind of tough to see, but this has got sliding glass doors in there, which is just not very safe, or even from a privacy standpoint. That's one of the things that we changed that I'll show you later on. Another photo of the property. Just a ton of deferred maintenance, not a lot of management, a couple of down units, and not pushing rents or managing it. This is some of the interiors, very basic. We actually love the wood ceilings on the top floor there, but this is what every unit looked like essentially from a classic standpoint. All right, so the opportunity I already mentioned, zero advertising. The property management company that they were using was a single family home provider. And if you know anything about single family home property management companies, you know, anytime you have a service call or anything like that, they charge you per visit, a flat fee plus whatever the cost of travel is, plus whatever the cost of the fix is. And so that can get pretty pricey, and their expenses, as you'll see later, were above 60%. So that was another opportunity. We wanted to put a full-time or a third-party property management company who had experience in multifamily, and we wanted to put a part-time maintenance person out there so that we didn't have to do service calls. No increases on rent for over 16 years on some of these units. So $300 was the lowest rent out there. So someone was paying $300 for a one-bedroom apartment out there, and you look at that, and I was drooling at that rent roll because there was so much opportunity there. True value add, which is another thing, especially now. This was a year and a half ago. There's not a lot of true value add out there. A lot of people say that there's a value add opportunity. You need to look a little bit further into that, because value add can mean something as simple as, you know, charging RUBS or increasing RUBS by $10 or $20. So is it a true value add? A lot of the properties in our market, Phoenix and Tucson, are second, third, fourth generation value adds, which means, you know, an owner's already added a lot of value to the property, and now he's flipping it to the next person to add value. And the more that happens, the more risk you take on, because there is only so much that you can push the rents. So it's something to be careful of for sure. Surrounding properties started the value add phase. So we knew this area was starting to build up. There was some new construction. There's the #1 elementary school in all of Arizona, walking distance from our property. So we like this submarket. And then the owner had just installed solar on there. And the reason why that's important is because they had installed it 2 months prior. And so the T12 did not reflect any of those savings at that point, but we knew we could underwrite some of those savings and essentially offer a little bit higher than some of the other competition that wasn't underwriting for that. On the T12, it was showing without solar. So that was something we did creative with our underwriting. So the business plan was to do interior upgrades, change out the doors, which actually is the biggest thing that we did. That was the biggest risk and also the biggest reward. It completely changed the look of the property. It also changed the safety side of the property. And those doors were $2,000 a unit, which we ended up only putting in about $4,000 a unit total. So to put in half of what we were planning to do into just the doors was a big risk, and it ended up paying off. A lot of the other stuff was really fixing deferred maintenance, a lot of things that just had not been done over the years of this person purchasing this property, just not keeping it up, right? We had to redo the railings because they were not safe. They were very loose. The insurance company actually made us do that. No paint, a lot of things like that. Let's see what else here. And then advertise. I think advertising was the biggest thing. It just was not being advertised. And by simply just advertising it, even on Craigslist, which is actually our biggest lead generator for this property, we can't, we're at 97 to 100% occupied the entire time. And we're pushing rents I think now for the 7th time, which I'll talk about a little bit later. So here's the business plan by the numbers. We plan to put $335,000 into it. We actually only used $170,000 of the upgrades because we were willing to pivot and keep an eye on our budget. So I think a lot of the times when people are doing value add, they just go in, they get their stuff done, they follow the plan, but they don't ever take a look at where they're currently at and how they can pivot and adjust. And a business plan is a living, breathing thing, and you need to be able to monitor it day in, day out, week in, week out, and adjust on the fly. And what we found is that we didn't need to spend money on certain things that we thought we would to get the rents. And in some cases, we actually spent less. And so because of that, we were able to save quite a bit on a lot of the budget and upgrades that we were going to end up doing. As you can see there, studio average rents are $409. We are now charging $579. And again, we're 97% occupied right now. 1 bedroom's $493, and that's utilities included. Now we're charging $715 for the 1 bedrooms plus 38 rubs. So huge increase there. Expense ratio was 67%. We know that in the Arizona market, you can get expense ratios down to at least 40% for certain stabilized properties. And you ask why that is. I know rule of thumb is 50%, but go back and understand your market. Certain markets are different than others. There are certain properties that operate in the 30s in Arizona. Insurance is very low in Arizona. Not a lot of natural disasters. Taxes is very low, and the increase on taxes is only 5% year over year, right? Whereas in some other markets, they could double upon purchase. That's not something that can happen in the Arizona market. And then a lot of, what is it called? Landscaping, you can do the dry scape, so you can save on some utilities and water and things like that, and landscaping costs in general. So you can actually get your expenses down to the 30-40% ratio. So that was kind of our plan right there. A little bit about the submarket. I already talked about it a little bit, but it's next to a Whole Foods. It's got Starbucks on both sides of the property. It's walking distance to the #1 elementary school in Arizona. And there was new construction that was starting just right next to the Whole Foods as well. So we knew we were in a growing submarket. I mentioned earlier, there were a lot of properties that were purchased just around it that were starting the value add phase. So we knew we were in a really good position there. And we purchased this at $39K a door. Now in the submarket, I mean, you can't even find stuff for $60 a door. This is just 13, 14 months ago. So this is the rebranding of the property. So this is now called Midtown on 2nd. It was called Townhouse East when we first got it. And these are not townhomes by any means, and it's not even on the east side of Tucson. So just in that alone, just the way they were branding the property just was not done very well. So we rebranded it Midtown on 2nd. My wife chose those colors, and whether you like it or not, it has worked extremely well, and I think it looks fantastic. And so we painted the entire thing, rebranded it, and as you can see on this slide, there's a better look at it. The biggest thing we did was change out sliding glass doors for those wood panel doors. It does still have a lot of glass, but we covered those up with blinds, and people absolutely love it. These are actually a mix of studios and 1 bedroom. So I saw a question earlier on what do you prefer? Initially, when we were going in the Arizona market, I had the same bias as many people do. More 2 bedrooms is better. And our other property in Phoenix is more predominantly 2 bedrooms, 75%. But it really depends on the market and then the demand. I would buy this property again all day long, studios and 1 beds. It's 2 miles east of the school, AAVU. And in Arizona, we cannot keep the studios or 1 bedrooms from being rented. I mean, we're 100% at all of our properties on the studios and 1 beds. So it really just depends on the submarket and the general area and the market itself. So I wouldn't say shy away from that. Definitely do your due diligence and look into it. But at one point I was shy of buying anything with studios and 1 beds, but in our market, I would buy those all day right now. The demand is extremely high for those. And this is the interiors here. So we resurfaced the countertops. We painted them a different color. We added some flooring. And that was basically it. That backsplash right there cost $35. You can get it at Home Depot. It's a stick-on, right? But it makes the kitchen look a lot better. Now you can't have it in anywhere that gets moist or has water, but for $35, we'll put that in all day, and it makes the kitchen look pretty solid. The other thing that we did that was not part of the business plan actually originally was after we got stabilized about 3 or 4 months in, we were seeing rent growth triple, quadruple what we were initially planning. So we actually called our broker. Our rule of thumb in business plan is always to list the property with the broker we bought it from, unless that broker is not a competent broker, okay? And it goes a little further into that. But so we planned on selling this property with our broker that we bought it from. So we called them to the property, said, hey, look, these are the interior renovations we're doing. Here's the exterior, it's all done. What do you think we should do? How can we position this best for sale if we were considering it? And he said, I think you should implement a premium unit and see what you can get for rents on that. Like I mentioned earlier, there was about almost $200,000 that we didn't spend, or $150,000 we didn't spend on interior renovations. So we said, okay, let's try a premium unit, see what we can get. So we did this unit here, and the only thing we did was stainless steel appliances. That is a glass background, backsplash there, painted the cabinets white, and then we added the accent wall there on the left. So that cost us about $1,200 additional, and we're getting $90 more in rent for that property. Okay, so we're basically making up, our ROI on that is we make that up in less than a year and a half. And what that does to the NOI, if you guys know, it just multiplies it. So we started doing these, we did 6 of them, and we rented them out each in less than a week. And so at that point, we asked our broker, what do you think we should do? And so we listed it for sale. And we're under contract currently for the price that we wanted it in year 6, and it's been 15 months. So, you know, it doesn't look fancy. This is a studio here, but, you know, this studio rents for less than $600 a month. So, and in Tucson, you know, that's one of the reasons why we love this market is because the cost of living is so cheap. I mean, the unemployment alone, you know, the extra $600 a week covers this in 1 week. So the challenges, I always like to talk about challenges that we have because no deal is perfect. As Feras mentioned, there's always headaches and hiccups. And so a lot of the things on our first deal, it's our first deal, that went wrong was the lender and it closing. You don't know what you don't know. And I think one of the biggest things and the biggest reasons why you want to partner with someone who's been there before is on the lending side of it. There are so many unknowns with the lender. They control the deal because they are lending you 70 to 80% of the deal. So they can pull out, they can change terms at any time that they really want. And so, you know, we communicated a couple of things to the lender. We did not have it in writing. They changed their mind. We actually had to switch lenders last minute. It was very stressful. We only had 29 days to close. And we ended up closing last day. We ended up getting a huge discount on the interest rate. However, I would not want to go through that again where we just did not have a backup plan, really, number one, and understand the entire lending environment from A to Z. When changing out those doors to the solid wood doors, we didn't think about the blinds. So we actually had to spend a little bit more money on the blinds because everyone could see through with those doors if there were no blinds on there because the windows were so big. And that was a challenge also because we had to go back in and disturb the residents with another notice that we were going to go into their units. And so one of the things you want to take into consideration when you're doing value add is how much are you going to be disturbing the residents, how often, and what are the things you can do to mitigate that? How can you do it all in one shot versus in this case, we were painting, redoing railings, changing out doors, and then doing the blinds, and we all did them at separate times. So at 4 different times, we were actually disturbing the residents, and it was one thing that we had to, you know, calm the residents down in a bit. This is their place of living, right? They live there every day. This is their home, and so it's something to take into consideration. Won't go into all these. We did have a death on the property. Not a fun thing at all to deal with. He was actually in the property while we were painting the property, while I was on property. We actually didn't know because the whole property was covered up and painted, and you can't smell that at that point. And a couple days later, we found him in his unit. And so obviously that was a challenge. COVID-19 has been a challenge. We've worked our way through around it. But the biggest challenge upon sale has been the prepayment penalty. And I really want to touch on this. We did a yield maintenance prepayment penalty. And I think a lot of people over the last 5 years have done yield maintenance because you get a 30 to 40 basis point discount in your interest rate. And most people think about what the returns look like today, not 5 years from now when you have to deal with it. So they kick the can down the road. So we have to do an assumption on this deal. In March, our prepayment penalty was $150,000. Today, our prepayment penalty is $375,000. Because with yield maintenance, the lower the rates go, the more your prepayment penalty is. Because essentially, yield maintenance prepayment penalty is paying back all the interest for the life of your loan. So it was a challenge, right? If we want to sell it, we can't do a straight sale because we can't afford to have a $400,000 prepayment penalty on a 42 unit, $1.65 million purchase. It's 25%. It's 40% of the loan. So we have to do an assumption, which means the buyer has to put down about 45% on this. It's not interest only. There's zero interest only. So we've got about 1.5 years left on interest only. So you've got to find the perfect buyer in this situation. Right now we have them, but it was a challenge for sure to find the right person. And we still don't know if we'll get to the closing table. And it's all going to come down to this loan essentially because the proceeds are very limited. And during COVID, if anything dips at all, then it could really screw up the loan. So be careful on the loan that you sign. And don't just think about the entrance of getting it closed. Also think about the exit because it can certainly hurt you. And you may need to hold on to a property for 5-6 years longer than you anticipated because of that yield maintenance prepayment penalty. So either put it in your plans or, do another loan. Right now we look at Freddie Mac floater loans. It's a 1% lockout, so you can't sell it within 1 year. And then after that, it's a 1% prepayment penalty. And I love that because it's predictable. Or go with a step down where that's also predictable. You may have to pay a couple points more, but at least you can underwrite for it and predict it. Because with the yield maintenance, it's not possible to understand what that payment's going to be, even in year 5, because it depends on where the interest rates are. Okay. And then, sorry, I know I'm going long here, so kick me off, pal, if I'm going too long. But here are the results. I'm almost done. All exterior was done within 90 days. We only spent 170 of the 335, actually, K spent for renovations. Rents on upgraded units, right now we're achieving year 4 projected rents. And the premiums that we did were at above year 6 projected rents. Okay, so we're getting 10% increase on upgraded units. On projected year 1 rents and 42 on in-place rents. And then for the premium units, 22% increase on projected year 1 rents, 55% increase on in-place rents. Do I have one more? Yes. So currently under contract for above this year 6 sales projected. We raised $1 million in equity. Purchase price is 1.65. It's under contract right now for 2.82. So about a $900K profit in 15 months. And so that's kind of what we're looking at and hoping to get. If it doesn't go through in the sale, we're still plenty fine. We're well above projections and cash flowing heavily. I did see a question earlier about why Feras decided to sell. The reason why we decided to sell, and we did take a vote with all our investors. We got a 100% vote. It's about, for us, taking a look at the velocity of our investors' money. Right now, there's a lot of trapped equity because you're only getting paid for what you put into the deal. You can't get that equity out unless you sell. And so right now we have the opportunity to triple our investors' money. Obviously, it depends on the projections on the next deal and selling it at this, but triple our investors' money in the same time frame versus doubling. And so when we find that out and we did the math, it makes sense to sell here, get our investors into another deal. We can add more value and then get them 3x instead of 2x in the same time frame. So that's my presentation.
Awesome. That was great. I mean, that was great by both of you guys. I think you guys both added tons of value inside of there when it talks about like a deal from the very beginning to the very end, and especially these being early deals that you guys have done. I think there was a great amount of info that everybody could learn from. Now, we did have a ton of questions. I think we're going to have a hard time getting to all of them, but we are going to ask them in sort of a, Bethany's going to help me ask them in a quick fashion. So if Feras and Kyle, if you could just answer them in a sort of a quick fashion. anything that we don't get, what we're going to try to do is we're going to try to add some of these questions onto our Facebook group where, you know, we post the recording and things. And that way, Feras and both Kyle are obviously very active in our Facebook group, so they can answer a lot of these questions inside of there too as well. So, but Bethany, are you ready for question number one?
Yeah, we have a couple. I'll group them together a little bit, and both of the questions pertain.
Kyle and I will lightning around it. Kyle, let's do it.
Yeah. All right. So managing work remotely is one that's come up a few times from David Merriger and Tim Yuzaboff. Finding contractors and property managers, and particularly what does that process look like? How do you vet them? How do you make those relationships in a new market?
Biggest thing is referrals. That's maybe what I'll say, because also we've done deep value ads, talked to people that are in that market. We even partnered with someone that was already in that market just so we could tap his Rolodex, right? And also that GC didn't even work out, so we picked a different one. But referrals and just being out there, right? We like Atlanta because I could do day trips. I'm literally out there, 6:30 a.m. flight out to Atlanta, 7 p.m. flight back, same day. So if a problem happens, I can get out there. So, you know.
Yeah, same. Proximity is key. I can fly in an hour, be out there in 5 to 8 hours, depending if it's Phoenix or Tucson. But we only look in those two markets. We spent 4 months picking our property management company, our contractors. We're out there every other week pre-COVID. So it's about being out there and managing it and setting up the systems up front so that you can manage them on the back end. Don't set up your systems after the fact. Don't figure it out after the fact. But it really is about being in the market and understanding it.
Okay, awesome. Next from Jason Sau, how do you go about formulating the budget if it's your first property in the market and no prior experience? What kind of tips or recommendations would you give for that?
Yeah, for us, we relied heavily on our property management company, obviously, right? But also referrals. Just like Feras said, we had other referrals of people who owned in the market, and we talked to them. We went and took a look at their properties, understood, you know, what type of rehabs they're doing, and also they were able to supply us with some of the quotes that they got. So really leverage your network, but also our property management company.
Completely agree. Property management company, talk to people that are in that market. And I mean, guys, it's really not that hard. Don't overthink it, right? Get out there, get 3 bids. You'll know roughly where things are going to fall out. And the big thing is, and this is probably what I learned, and probably Kyle's learned this too, have a lot more buffer. For these deeper value ads, having more buffer makes life a lot easier. Maybe it's a little bit less returns because you have to raise more money, but ultimately it's so much easier to kind of better to have that. So,
Great. Okay. Feras, did you happen to answer the question about selling early? I think this is.
Yeah, so I mean, I think for us, so Kyle mentioned yield maintenance because this was the agency debt, right? Luckily for us, we were in a bridge loan. So bridge has the benefit of being able to make a nice exit where I don't have to pay this huge prepay penalty. We had 2 other deals that we have sold that were agency, and we had to eat the huge amount of loss, right? Just to basically pay the prepay penalty. For this deal, we didn't, and we were sitting on so much equity, right? That ultimately, I'm a believer in, if you're sitting on a ton of equity, it's probably better to sell, take that money and go put it into 3 other deals. And so for us, I mean, it just didn't make sense. Yes, we could have refied and probably pulled out maybe close to 100% investor money, but that was a deal that really the next buyer was going to be able to do more than we would, right? Because if we think about it, we refied, we weren't going to do another reposition, whereas the next buyer, we took it to kind of a stabilized deal. Well, the next buyer can now try to do that higher end finish. And so there's more meat for him, and it makes it more attractive for him to pay up a little bit more too.
Nice. Okay. Feras, I think this in regard to your second property. I think there's mention of a buffer. Chevelle Freeman is asking, what is a buffer? Probably in terms of the budget.
Yeah, just a buffer in your budget. Like we literally, so one tip, if you're doing deep value ads with your lender, be vague. Don't tell them that you're going to replace 32 appliances. Say interior upgrades. Don't tell them you're going to do this and this and this, because they will try to hold your feet to the fire for each thing you tell them. So be as vague as you can get away with. Like literally, if I could, I would tell a lender, I'm going to do $900,000 of upgrades. That's all I'm going to say. And then they're going to ask what kind of upgrades. I'm going to do some 500,000 interior, 400,000 exterior. You know, I kind of try to be as big as I can. And then on top of that, they'll have a big buffer that's just really a slush fund, right? You can move things around. Okay, this money, we ran under budget on this, but ran over budget on this, and this other thing happened. We want to do a little bit more here and there. So.
And is there like a rule of thumb or a percentage per unit?
It depends on your type of deal, right? Like on a deep value add where you have offline units, you have a lot of unknowns, you need more buffer, right? Versus a stabilized deal, you're just doing interior upgrades, right? There's a lot less room for error. So I don't have a good answer on that. But I mean, you should always have reserves, right? On a 200 unit property, have $200,000-$300,000 of reserves. But that's different than just buffer in your budget for upgrades and things.
Okay, awesome. How about experience with average length of tenancy for studio one bed? I know we kind of covered both sides.
Yeah, it's also those questions. I mean, I like 2 3-bedroom units, right? Why? Because it's more family oriented, right? Guess what? More family oriented properties, you create a place that people want to stay. And it's a lot more work for 2 people to move or 3 people to move or 2 adults and 2 kids to move than it is for an individual, right? They have a lot more stuff. There's a lot more hassle of moving, right? And ultimately, if you build a place that, if you not build, but if you run a place that people like being at, right, they're going to stick there. And guess what? Your turn costs go down a lot. Because turn costs, I mean, you're burning $1,000, $2,000, $3,000 each time someone moves out and someone moves in. Well, guess what? If you keep them happy, right? Spend that money on them, they're going to stay there. And it's just easier to do that with more family-oriented places. So just less transient.
Yeah, for me, when I first bought the property, that was one of my biggest concerns, to be honest with you. And we've just not seen a lot of turnover at our property. I think it's one of the things that we got lucky on for sure. But even in our Phoenix property, we're 100% occupied in our 1 bedrooms. And so it's just a matter of knowing your market. But the other thing is that we're going to build in a little bit more delinquency. We're going to build in a little bit more turnover because we know that it is more of a transient person, right? So it's just about budgeting for it. If you know what's coming, then you can maneuver around them. Like Feras said, having a little bit extra buffer in there makes things a lot easier. And that's just how we always look at it is, okay, if we're going to have more studios and 1 beds, we're going to have more of a buffer on economic occupancy than we would on something that's majority 2 and 3 beds that maybe we have washer dryers in and that we think more families are going to stay in. So it's about the budgeting process and understanding your risk and then going from there.
Okay, awesome. Next question from Chevelle Freeman. Did you offer any type of concession to the existing tenants when doing the upgrades? For either of you, is that something you implemented?
For me, no. I mean, as you can see by my slides, I mean, people were paying $300 a month. These people are well below market. Now, what we do is we try and communicate to them as much as possible. And look, they're living in a property that's really dilapidated right now, not cared for. And we're going in there and we're putting in hundreds of thousands of dollars to make it safer, cleaner, and a better living place. And so I think it's more about communication. You certainly don't want to just go in there and start ripping stuff out and being a nuisance, but as long as you communicate what the plan is and why you're doing it and how it's going to improve the property, I think most people are going to want to see that. So no concessions for the current residents.
Awesome. Okay. Feras, have you sold that second deal yet?
No.
That sell? Okay.
We will probably have an offer here in the next couple of weeks.
It is up for sale.
If anyone's interested, feel free to reach out.
All right, next question from Omid. With acquisition, there are varying strategies, broker versus direct mail, et cetera. What do you recommend for someone trying to get their first deal in the 20 to 50 unit range or first deal at all?
I would say find partners, try to do a bigger deal, right? Like your life, I mean, Kyle, like bigger deals are more enjoyable, right? Maybe from an ownership perspective, right? And so, I mean, I would just say in general, right? Definitely try to go to 80 units or up, right? Just so you have full-time staff. And it's just about, that is business is a partnership business, right? Get out there, talk to people, figure out someone that has similar interests, same maybe point in life, looking to do the same things, right? But ultimately, it's really, get to know your brokers. They control the gates to anything. Even off-market deals are not really off-market. There's still a broker involved in some capacity, right? And so really work those relationships, right? It's about calling the broker at the right time, at the right day, while they're in the right mood. I mean, that's really a lot of what it boils down to. So.
Yeah, which is why I call brokers every other week. And some of them hate me for it. And other ones, I strike up a relationship with. But there's no right or wrong way on how to get your first deal. I agree with Feras. The larger deals are easier to manage. Our 42 unit, even though it's done great, it takes more management on my end. We have more turnover with the part-time staff because it's part-time. So those are just some of the things that you're going to have to be able to manage. But Bethany, I think, got her first deal with direct mail. I got mine through a broker relationship, calling that person and befriending them. So there's no right or wrong way. But what I would tell you is don't number one, stay consistent on what you do. Don't give up. You have to be consistent. You can't send 2 direct mail letters and expect to have a deal. And have multiple ways how you're trying to source deals, because in a market like today, I don't know if people know this, but since COVID, cap rates, at least in Arizona, have actually compressed. So the market's actually gotten more competitive during COVID. So if you only have one source of deal flow, you're going to really struggle. So just get out there and have as many sources as possible.
Okay. Let's see. Can both of you speak briefly to the structure of financing and maybe vetting lenders? How you decided on?
So I saw there's a question for me about the loan. So both of the deals that I presented, both of those are bridge loans, right? So bridge, it basically you can get higher leverage, right? They're really meant to be for reposition deals, right? Not stabilized deals. And so we were doing deep value add. We had a lot of rehab. And in both of them, right, the lender holds on to a good chunk of the rehab. And as I've grown, I've learned I prefer to actually have the lender hold less money from that first deal that I learned, right? It's just such a pain whenever they're holding on to most of it because you're at their mercy. But in general, right, the way it works, the lender holds on to a good chunk of the money. You do the upgrades. You prove to them you do the upgrades. You submit a request. They send someone out there to verify, and then they release that money to you. And so it's part of the loan, and it's kind of baked into the process. And so both of those are bridge loans. And, you know, like I said, with both of them, we can make exits without having to pay really big penalties.
Yeah, we've done agency debt on both of ours. And, you know, we had an issue on the first deal with a mortgage broker, and through that relationship, we don't use that person anymore because there was a lack of transparency. And to be honest, after looking into it, we were being taken advantage of because it was our first deal. And I think that can happen more often than not. You just don't know about it. So, you know, Feras is right when he says team up with someone. I said it earlier, you need to have someone who's gone through the loan process. The stronger your team going into a loan, the better of a deal you're going to get. I think everyone talks about what the absolute minimum a lender requires, but no one says that is a minimum. And so just having barely enough net worth and liquidity and just 2 years of experience, you're going to get, you know, a less than average and less than beneficial loan proceeds. And so have a team out there that can help you with that and understand it from A to Z. But we do use agency debt. We feel safer with it. Bridge loans is something we've taken a look at. I wouldn't use them in this environment right now, but those are more for heavy value add. We haven't done those heavy value adds yet.
And Kyle still doesn't have that much gray hair, so.
Yeah, it's coming in. Lolita would tell you differently, I'll tell you that.
All right, we got about time for like one last question for you both before we get into our breakout rooms and then close up at the top of the hour here. So go ahead, Bethany.
Trying to decide if I should be selfish and ask my own questions. I have one for Feras.
Yeah, you get to ask a question. Go for it, Bethany. It's you.
I'll catch you later. No, it's okay. Let's see. Ray Ritchie is asking, how do you figure out what upgrades have the highest ROI?
You try, right? You try things. Go see what others are doing. Try it out yourself. See what returns you're getting. Don't go say, I'm going to go do 100 of these same things before you really try 1 or 2 or 3, right? It's all piecemeal. And it's okay to change as you go, right? And you got to it's a balance between, do you have the budget? Are you getting the returns? And can you do more of them or not, right? We have a property where we have literally, I think, $300,000 of interior upgrades that's been sitting for 2 years because we literally have not been able to get people to move out. Like we've been pushing in rents and pushing it. And like we've made it a lot nicer on the outside, but it's just sitting there. And so that ROI has been maybe infinite, I guess. And so, you know, you have to try things. So for that, we just start using the money on other things to kind of improve. So.
Yeah, I mentioned it earlier. Your business plan is a living, breathing thing. And so it's not set in stone. So you're not going to just say, okay, we're going to spend $7,000 a unit and that's all you're going to do and just stick to that. You need to try things. Do we need to spend a little bit more to get more rent? Can we spend a little bit less? Do we need to do something different? I mean, you're always constantly tweaking things, just like we did with the premium unit, right? That was not in the budget, but we tried one and the ROI was fantastic. And because of that, we went and did more. We didn't do, 5, 10 at one time. So you need to test the market on certain things. And as you get more acclimated with your markets and have more experience, you're going to feel more and more confident about that business plan. But that's why having the buffer in there allows you for that flexibility. If you don't, then you're kind of limited to your business plan, and therefore your entire plan it's just limited. So always build in that little buffer for some flexibility.
Awesome.
Great, guys.
Very cool. Very cool. So we appreciate that Q&A. I mean, that was awesome. We are going to move on right now to sort of our last portion. We're going to go to breakout rooms. The rooms will be kind of small, so feel free to make sure you introduce yourself. It's only going to be probably about 7, 8 minutes. So give everybody a chance to introduce themselves, tell you where you're from, what you're doing as far as investing, and definitely pass your contact info back and forth as well.
And before people hop off, right? Thank you guys for hopping on. Definitely glad to have you on. And just to recap, right? The next MFM Live is in 2 weeks from now, talking about asset protection, right? Learn to protect your wealth. So it should be a very informative topic, right? A little different, but it should be really high value and learn from a professional. So Bradley with Bradley Law is going to be speaking about asset protection. So definitely look forward to seeing you guys there. But otherwise, we'll see you on the breakouts.
Okay. Do we want to come back after that, Feras, or not?
Yeah, we can try. I mean, something will start to fall off, so I wanted to kind of make sure we mentioned it.
Okay, perfect. All right, we'll see you in the rooms.
Jeff Greenberg, that's a very nice room you're in. Yes, he can't hear me.
Okay, just about everybody's coming back here. Okay, everybody back? Okay. Just wanted to say thank you again. Multifamily Masters, this is MFM Live. We do this every 2 weeks. So our next one will be in 2 weeks on Monday, 5:30 p.m. Pacific. I don't know what that time is for everybody else's time, but again, Feras, what are we going to be talking about that time?
We're going to be talking about asset protection, not asset management, asset protection, right? How do you structure your businesses, your wealth, all these things to help kind of protect you in the case of lawsuits or people coming after you? So it should be a really informative topic. I'm excited. I think it's really, I've listened to a few of them, and I think there's just so much to learn in that space. I think a lot of people think of it after the fact. So it'd be good to kind of get ahead of that.
Absolutely. And we did just put out our newsletter. So if we don't have your contact information, you can send an email to team@multifamilymasters.com. That's again, team@multifamilymasters.com. We can put you on our newsletter list. And we also do have our mastermind, which is starting up pretty soon here. So if you're interested in joining a mastermind for accountability and having a tight group of people to work with, feel free to reach out to us at team@multifamilymasters.com as well. Okay. All right, everybody. Thank you very much. We'll see you all in 2 weeks. Okay. Take care, everybody.
Bye.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Good night, everyone.
Good night,
Good night, everyone. Thank you.
Good night. Thank you.